All right. Good afternoon from Singapore. Thank you all for joining Dao Street Asia's Asia PE VC Summit from around the world. My name is William, and I'm the Managing Director at Temasek Life Sciences Accelerator. All right, we're live. Good afternoon. Good afternoon from Singapore. Thank you for joining Dao Street Asia's Asia PE VC Summit from around the world. My name is William, and I'm the Managing Director at Temasek Life Sciences Accelerator. We are a joint venture between Temasek Life Sciences Laboratory and Vertex Venture Holdings. We incubate and invest in disruptive agri-food and synthetic bio-innovations, and these include nascent technologies in the alternative protein space. And we have teams working on cell-based structured meats to fermentation-based single-cell proteins, which is why I'm so delighted to be your host and moderator for today's panel session on alternative proteins, the future of food in Asia. So in the next 40 minutes or so, we will discuss about the growth drivers in the alternative protein sector, why it is touted as the future of food in Asia. We'll talk about the level of consumer acceptance for alternative protein products in Asia, and how Asia is catching up with the West to become a hub for global alternative protein companies that are expanding to Asia. We'll also look at how these companies are changing the economics of food, and finally, how investors can stand to gain in this growing sector. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists who are active investors themselves in the alternative protein space. Albert Tseng, co-founder of Dao Foods International. This is a cross-border investment firm that focuses on investments in alternative protein startups in China. You want to say hello?
Everybody.
And we have Thailand, managing partner of Proterra Asia, one of the largest PE firms investing in food and agribusinesses across Asia Pacific. Welcome, Thai.
Hello.
Good. So let me now invite our panelists to share a little bit more about themselves, their firm and investments, as well as their take on the alternative protein sector. So first, let's hear from Albert. Albert, take it away.
Thanks, William. Thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel. Happy to be here, and hope that everyone's having a great conference. Maybe just by way of introduction, as William mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Dao Foods. Both my co-founder, Tseng and I are coming at this from an impact perspective, impact investing perspective. Both of us have been in the impact investing space for over 10 years. Tao is from Beijing and started one of China's first impact investing firms focused mainly on climate and clean tech. And then I was working mostly on international development issues, including global health. And the way that I got into alternative protein was that I was running a startup actually out of the University of Toronto. And we were using big data and technology to understand the spread of infectious diseases. And we were venture financed by Horizon Ventures, which is Li Jiatzen's private investment arm. And, among other investments in, Zoom, Spotify, Waze, Facebook, Airbnb, those kind of tech companies, our company was in big data and health. But they had also invested in a number of alternative protein companies, including Impossible, Just, Perfect Day, Modern Meadow, quite a few sort of names that people in the alternative protein space would know. And every year they would bring all these companies together, the founders of these companies together. And in around 2013, 2014, I met some of these founders. And, for someone who was in the impact investing space and the social enterprise space, I had not really thought too much about the environmental impacts of industrial animal agriculture. And so these companies were really trying to innovate and diversify protein sources. And so I learned more about the issues that faced the world through our food system, and got really excited about alternative proteins. And so I reached out to Tao, who was actually a classmate of mine from the Harvard Kennedy School in 2009. We were both there for a mid-career program focused on social enterprise and impact investing. And I asked him what he was doing on food, and he said he's always wanted to engage the Chinese consumer in helping to solve Chinese environmental problems. And what better way than through food? And so that was the start of our journey. We got connected with the Good Food Institute, which is a think tank in the United States that is basically helping to build the entrepreneurial ecosystem around alternative protein, mainly in the US, but now around the world. And Bruce Friedrich, their executive director, said, you guys are social enterprise and impact investing people. We need to get this ecosystem started in China. And so he introduced us to the folks at New Crop Capital, which was the early investor in Beyond Meat and about now 40 alternative protein startups. And from there, that's how Dao Foods was born. So let me just share quickly my screen. We can quickly just go through some of the thinking. So our impact logic was looking at the traditional animal protein impact on resources. It's considered to, the livestock industry is considered to contribute 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than all transportation combined. Uses 23% of the world's fresh water, and it occupies 45% of the global land. And so, as you can see on the left side, many countries and regions of the world are at a pretty high average annual meat consumption per person. But you can see the line for China, it's actually increasing quite a bit over the last few decades, even though per capita it's much lower than many countries. And so as we see that continue to rise, now China being the biggest consumer of meat and seafood and many other animal protein products, if that continues to rise, there's simply in the world for the growing demand for protein, not enough land and resources to support the coming decades of protein requirements. And so this is where I think it's very exciting for us to diversify and look for other protein sources to meet this demand, while also introducing more sustainable sources of protein. So I think there's a lot of exciting innovations. This is, I believe, an impossible burger. And clearly there's a lot of exciting innovation. But when Tao and I started to look for exciting investments in China, particularly 3 or 4 years ago, there just wasn't that many companies working on this yet. And so, while there's a lot of innovation happening, China being 4 times the size of the US in terms of population, we just think that there's so much more room to grow and create from a nascent market into a more mature market. And so this is some data from AgFunder that shows kind of the global category of what they call innovative food. And most of that is alternative protein. You can see that the global amount of investment in the space is quite high, and then there's a big category. But in China, it's still quite low in terms of both the number of deals as well as the amount of investment moving into this category. So we feel that both from an impact perspective as well as a business perspective, there's a lot of room for growth in China. So our focus is specifically on mainland China and trying to get more entrepreneurship moving in this area. So we've been at it since 2017, 2018. At the beginning, we were doing more cross-border information sharing, bringing entrepreneurs and investors from the US and Europe into China to meet with Chinese stakeholders to see what has happened over the last decade in terms of alternative protein in the US and Europe, and helping Chinese stakeholders plot the course and envision what will happen in the next decade in China. And that has moved us into doing boot camps. So we've been hosting boot camps in many different cities across China to try to bring out entrepreneurs, food industry executives, investors that are interested to create communities where people can, meet each other, discuss, and, in some cases, create ventures. We've had entrepreneurs that have met at our events and shared ideas on how to create businesses that are focused on this exciting opportunity. So along the way, we've been actually looking for exciting companies to invest in. And one that I think is notable, which was one of our first investments, was Starfield out of Shenzhen. And back in March of 2019, we essentially met the entrepreneurs. They were running a plant-based food restaurant in Shenzhen that was quite popular. And they were very interested in, spreading that chain across many cities in China. And what we said was, food service is, operationally very difficult to scale and very real estate intensive. And so we said, why not create a product venture? And so they came back to us a couple months later and said, we have this product, this ground meat, plant-based ground meat product that we would like to push into the market. And then we were able to introduce them to some co-manufacturers that were able to work in this space and had a lot of experience from the traditional plant-based meat market in China. And so then they came back in saying that they needed capital to expand. And so we did their angel round together with New Crop Capital in the US and Matrix Partners and Joy Capital from Beijing. And so what's been exciting about this is that they've grown very quickly. They've done collaborations with Shita, Haiti, Daikos, and have gone through to over 10,000 restaurants now, I think, in China through these food service chains. And so we've been very excited, and we give all the credit to Starfield. Their entrepreneurial team has been going after it, but we felt that there were some aspects that we could help them with and help catalyze because we were in the sector. And so that inspired us to create an incubator. This is just some examples of the food products and applications that they've been able to put their plant-based products in. So what that inspired us to do was say, can we do that same similar story with other plant-based entrepreneurs? And so we created an incubator. Again, we believe that there's a shortage of entrepreneurs in the alternative protein sector in China. And so what we need to do is seed the marketplace with early stage ventures. We said it wasn't enough for us to do large investments at the beginning. We had to do more smaller investments to get these companies started that would eventually be Series A, Series B, Series C companies. And so we've so far invested in 10 companies. We work with about 4 to 6 companies every 6 months. And we've been really excited to, help some of these companies grow. We usually do a demo day after that 6 months to help these companies, tell their stories and get further follow-on investment from strategic investors. So these, company ranges from B2C companies that are doing functional food meal plans, and for example, soy yogurt drinks, to ingredient companies that are using microalgae and mycelium fermentation to create high-powered protein ingredients. So we're very, very excited about doing this. We have a mandate to invest in 6 cohorts of companies, which would give us approximately 30 companies in the portfolio to hopefully create an army of entrepreneurs working and creating a plant-based food category in China. So we continue to run events, and we're excited to share more ideas with you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Albert, for the exciting intro of Dao Foods, which focus on alternative protein startups in the early stage, as well as for the China market. So next, let's hear from Tai and find out more about Proterra Asia. Tai, take it away.
Yes, thank you, William. Thank you, Albert. And thank you, everybody, for inviting me to join the discussion here. I'll give you a short overview of who I am and what we do. I've been around with Proterra, or what used to be Proterra, for over 14 years. And Proterra is a relatively new name. What I will first do, I think, is show you a few slides as well. And with that, explain Proterra. So Proterra Investment Partners today, we are a independent private equity fund manager. We manage around close to $4 billion US, almost exclusively targeted in the sectors of food, farming, F&B, agriculture. A little bit unlike Dao Foods and Albert, we are a very generalist investor across the whole value chain of food. And that can go from farm down to a branded food product, beverage, ingredients, more recently, more ag tech and food tech type deals. But it's a global practice that looks at the whole sector. Proterra Asia is the Asian arm of Proterra. Here we manage around 1.6 billion. And I will show you later that we have quite a big footprint when it comes to our portfolio companies. In terms of background, we now have 55 people globally. All of us, we spun out of US agribusiness Cargill 6 years ago. So when I mentioned that Proterra is relatively new, the name is quite new. But as a team, we have been managing institutional capital and deployed into the food sector globally for close to 15 years. Now, the opportunity in Asia is especially interesting for us. When you think about globally, where is growth? And I don't just mean economic growth, I also mean demographic growth. It's all about Asia. And according to Temasek, Rabobank, and PwC, we have a 4 trillion market in front of us that will double or more in the next less than 10 years. Interestingly, when you look at all the countries in Asia, you can also see that between 40 to 70% of their GDP is private consumption. And then for nearly every country here, the CPI basket, consumer price index basket, food is almost always the largest portion. And so our general view is that unless you have direct exposure to the food sector in Asia, you're not really directly exposed to the growth of the Asian consumer. Now, we invest across the whole value chain of food, as I mentioned earlier, but we specifically and more recently target the sectors that we think are especially interesting and that experience hyper growth, if you will. And so alternative proteins, or at least what we call alternative proteins, is a very interesting secular trend in our view, especially for Asia. And that's also the reason why over the last several years, we have engaged in several projects across Asia in alternative proteins. Now, what we try to do is we try to use our knowledge and network, our portfolio footprint that we have already built across all of Asia, and help the new companies we invest into. So our existing portfolio footprint probably spans 20,000 employees, 20 to 30 companies that combined generate $12 billion in revenues from Asia. And they also own and operate around 200 locations, facilities, factories, farms across the continent. And so every time when we come to a new investment today, we try to somehow match this up and find cross-fertilization opportunities. And we have found that to be really effective. The other reason why alternative proteins is so front and center at the moment, not just for us, is because of the whole sustainability topic. Now, I think the sustainability topic is not new. It's been around for at least 30 years. I do believe that something that Albert mentioned is quite important. When you look at transport, energy, and food, those three sectors make up 90% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And in the earlier part of the last 20, 30 years, the sustainability investment and impact investment movement have really focused on transport and energy. And now it's time for food. And so whenever you have the sustainability discussion today, I think food is front and center. Maybe it's been a little bit neglected over the last 30 years, but rightly so, I think it's now a key area to look at. We are doing our part with the type of companies we invest into. We have specific calculations run by third-party certified consultants. And at the moment, our portfolio companies, for example, help to save 300 million kilograms of CO2. That's equivalent of removing 70,000 cars off the roads in America. And we continue to increase those numbers year on year. That's a quick overview of what we do. I know that our session is a little bit more specific to alternative proteins. It's an important piece of the overall mandate that we pursue. And so I'm happy to engage in more specific discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Ty. Yeah, thanks. Sure. So, alternative protein industry as a whole is really quite diverse. I mean, we have the plant-based type of proteins, insect-based proteins, lab-based cultured meats, right? And also fermented or microbial proteins. So Ty, given that, Protera invests across, the entire value chain of food, what is the market share of alternative proteins, right, compared to the global meat industry?
Well, first of all, I really think the definition of alternative proteins is quite important. Mm-hmm. In Asia, people have been eating mock meat and plant-based foods that mimic meat for thousands of years. And that market remains the biggest alternative protein market at the moment. But overall, you can say that the new version of alternative proteins, the one that we usually refer to these days when we talk, like Impossible, Beyond, that's the total market share there is still well below 1%. Wow. And that's true for everywhere around the world. And surprisingly, a place like China or Indonesia actually has higher proportion than the West, because you would have to include the old traditional style of alternative proteins into that number. But it's very small, it's below 1%. But that's about to change, and potentially very quickly. And I think a lot of people have drawn parallels to, for example, plant-based milk. Plant-based milks, they were below 1% market share before Oatly came along, or at least before Oatly started marketing. Right. And within, I think, 10 years, many countries in the West, and especially Northern Europe, report 13%, 10% or more. So within 10 years, it's gone from below 1% to over 10% in many countries. And similar trends have happened in solar energy and wind energy, in electric vehicles. So Cargill's CEO, for example, came out last month and said that alternative proteins will potentially make up as much as 20% of the market within the next 10 to 15 years. And this is a very dramatic shift.
Wow, that's really interesting. So Albert, with that shift, to this 20%, right, of market share, what are the next hero products, right? Because today we have plant-based milk, we have analogs of different kind of meat, right? From beef, pork, bacon. In your opinion, what are you seeing, as the next hero products?
I think Ty raises a good point that there's been so much sustainability products in the transportation area. I think you take the Tesla, right? It's not only a sustainability vehicle, it's a very desirable vehicle for mainstream consumers, or at least richer mainstream consumers. It's not because of it's only partly because of sustainability, but it's because people want to drive them, right? Performance, and energy savings and all that kind of stuff. So the question is, what is the analog for that in the food industry, right? It has to taste good. It has to beat the existing products out there, right? And so I think there's a number of very exciting developments that are happening in alternative protein space. I mean, we've seen what Impossible and Beyond are doing in the United States. What that looks like in Asia, in China, may look a bit different. And, I think it's all about food applications, right? And so we need a lot of entrepreneurs trying very different things to see what catches, right? And we need good products out there. And so I think I'm very excited about, I think yogurt became in China the largest dairy segment, I think last year or the year before. And so clearly there's a lot of opportunity for, plant-based drinkable yogurts, in China. And we have, for example, True Plants as part of our portfolio there. They have a soy yogurt, which, is selling quite well in some cities. And then I think that, along that line, sort of the health angle in China, I think is very important, right? And so the light food category is a pretty exciting one where people are looking for functional foods, right? So we have an entrepreneurial team in Shanghai called 7030 Food Science and Tech, and they are working on functional foods, but it's all plant-based, right? So on their packaging, they have 20 grams protein, 6 grams fat. They have the keto version, they have the low-fat version, right? It's very functional for elite athletes or people who are trying to lose weight. That class of customer, I think, is a very quite niche now, but growing very, very rapidly, right? And then, of course, we have ingredient companies, people doing mycelium fermentation, right? So we have a company, Blue Canopy, out of Qingdao that's doing that. We have a microalgae company out of Hong Kong, Gap Impact, that is, working on, all of these ingredients can really become superfoods, right? That you can have high protein, high vitamins, high omega-3s in these raw materials that can be added into a lot of foods and replace animal protein. So I think there's a lot of exciting things that we can be all excited about, and a lot of investment opportunities that will come up.
Great, thanks, Albert. And Ty, you are the board of director and chairman at Eat Just, this whole space of lab-grown meats, right? How competitive are they really, right, compared to the plant-based proteins, and what kind of challenges do you see lab-grown kind of meat, going to market?
Thanks for mentioning Just. Maybe I can briefly describe what happened there, or what we hope to happen there. Eat Just is one of the leading alternative proteins companies out of the US. I think many people in Singapore or Asia have heard of them. Proterra set up a Asia JV with Just a year ago. It's a 50-50 JV, and we basically helped them build and run the Asia business. And so far, it's going quite well. There's an interesting reason why we believe Just would be one of the themes that would be suitable for Asia. As you know, there's so many different alternative protein companies. And interestingly, in nearly every food category, the Western countries have higher per capita consumption than Asia. double or triple. Meat, fruits, juice, what have you. There's one important and big exception, it's eggs. It just so happens that Japan and China are #1 and #2 in per capita consumption of eggs, which is not only surprising given the fact that usually everything is the other way around, but also it doesn't take into account the average smaller body weight and all these different reasons. So we thought that would be something that has the opportunity to go after the real Asia opportunity, which is, the 5 billion in 10 or 15 years across all of Asia. And I think that's generally the theme. We can't just take a US product, like what Albert said, and bring it to Asia the same way. It would have to be much more customized for the local market. Your question as it relates to Eat Just. Yes, Eat Just is not our only exposure in alternative proteins in Asia. We have business in Thailand, in China, and with Eat Just as well. It's something that's very exciting. Plant-based is getting, we think at maturity, the eggs is probably gonna be around 20% premium to the premium chicken eggs. And the cell or the lab grown, or I like to call it the clean meat, is something that's still much further away. Depending on how far away you go into the past, a chicken nugget would have probably cost you $4,500 or so. It's come down from 1.5 years ago, but it remains to be seen when we can hit the price parity. I personally believe that the lab-grown or the clean meat is one of the very, very few potential game changers for the history of the sector. Micro innovation and general innovation in our food sector is happening every single day. And the smallest type of innovation is maybe some farmer with some irrigation system has just made his irrigation system 1% more efficient last month. And that's happening every day. But the really, really, really big game changers, I think, only happen every couple of thousands of hundreds of, or a couple of decades. And when 2,500 years ago, human beings decided to domesticate animal for food, I think that was a game changer. And when 25 years ago, people started to gene modify seeds of the crops, I think that's another game changer. I do believe that the lab-grown clean meat has the potential to be one such game changer as well. And it's not just changing the production and the product, it's changing the whole supply chain. You think back about all these different steps, from land to seeds, to pesticides, to the workers, the communities, it will change all of that. So I'm watching with a heightened level of interest this sector very closely.
Right. And since we're on that note, there's a question from the audience on how Protero is bringing Just Eat to Asia. The question is, what is the advantage of setting up the manufacturing base in Singapore vis-a-vis Thailand, Indonesia in the region?
Well, I don't think we have time to go through a very, very lengthy answer, but in short, Asia makes a lot of sense because mung beans are from Asia. And you don't need to ship it to the other side of the world, especially if only 15% of the product go into the final product. 2, when you grind up the mung beans, you end up with 50% in mung bean starch, which is a very good ingredient, a premium ingredient into the glass noodle market. And that market only exists in Asia, especially South Asia. So you create an extra stream of revenues, which you can't create when you have the plant in Europe or the West. Now, there's a question around where in Asia. And we ran different models. We looked at Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, India. The key question is, do you want to be at source, at market, or somewhere in between? And in the end, we decided, because of government support and innovation, because of political and intellectual stability and security, to start with Singapore, taking into account all the considerations. But that doesn't mean that plan 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 could be at source or somewhere completely different.
Right. Good. And no, thanks for that. And Albert, I know you're currently in Canada, but a lot of your activities are investing in China-based kind of alternative protein startups. So, what in your opinion, what is the level of consumer acceptance, in Asia, in China, compared to what you see in the West?
Yeah, I think it's still early because, I think the US has gotten a head start in terms of some of the products being more readily available for consumers to try, right? And so I think that, it's still quite early to say. We see a lot of limited time offers now in China, sort of trialing, and we're still at early revisions of products. So companies are still refining their products. So it really is, because I think in China, we have this history, as Ty mentioned, of, plant-based meat in the past, Buddhist vegetarian meat, mock meats. And so there may be this feeling of, I've seen this before, right? And the reality is that many of those products were not aimed to replace meat. They were not trying to have the high fidelity of meat. They were not trying to convince meat eaters to eat it. It was for Buddhist vegetarians, right? And so I think the new innovation in food tech needs to be applied to many different sources. And that come in many different forms, right? If there's this feeling that is this is, they have this view of an inferior product of the past, how do we change that mindset, right? And so there's many ways, if it's, for example, a superfood protein ingredient, right? For example, from a microalgae, and you can use that ingredient to coat like a noodle, right? And so now all of a sudden your noodles, which was just starch before, has, high protein, high amino acids, high vitamins or omega-3s or whatever it is that we get from that ingredient with the same or better taste. Then is that something that is going to command consumer interest, right? That's just one example. So I think there's many ways to approach this, but you have to really communicate to the consumer what is the value proposition for your product. I think, at the end of the day, the consumer decides, what product wins.
Right, thank you. And hopefully that answers one of the audience questions, right, on how companies can convince Asian customers to consume plant-based meat. And Ty, there's another question from the audience. What is the return on investment horizon for alternative protein investments, right? What is your take on that?
Well, what's the return on investment is a difficult question because it depends what you invest into. But I think this question falls into the same thought process that you just addressed, Albert. I think there's with all due respect, fallacy nearly, right? There's a thinking of, well, the alternative protein needs to replace all meat. Now, that might or might not be true, and we can have a different discussion about this very philosophically, what's good and bad for the world. But just as a simple investor looking at individual projects, right? Here's how I think about return in the sector. If we invest into a plant-based brand, like we have a top 10 brand in China, right? Our goal isn't to make 6-7 billion stop eating meat and take over the world. That was never our goal. We are not trying to convince you to change whatever you do, right? What we are trying to do is to offer one more option to the hundreds of options you have every day when you eat. It's just an additional option It's a growing market. People have more money. They spend more money. They eat more, in Asia at least. And so, for example, if we can get only 1 person in 10, or 1 meal in 10 for every person, in 10 years, not today, not tomorrow, in 10 years to convert, then you're talking about a $200 billion market. And we have a chance to create one of the leading companies in this space now. So by the time we get there and are wildly successful, we have probably not really changed the world. It needs a lot more to do that, but you can be extremely successful as an investor in your project.
Right. Good. Okay. So unfortunately, we have run out of time. It's really fascinating, this afternoon to gain insights from industry thought leaders like Albert and Tai. We have come to an end of our panel discussion. So a big thank you to Albert and Tai, our panelists. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you Georgie and the team at Deal Street Asia for having us. Hope to be able to see you all next year. Till then, stay safe and keep well. Bye-bye.